required to serve in the role of pastor? Because I just
The role of pastor, wow.
Yeah, because I'm thinking about when I grew up, the pastors that were in place didn't necessarily have any formal training, but they did feel like they were called by God.
Yeah, that's a good question as well. Historically, and I went there too, historically, when we look at the role of the pastor, even in American history, recent American history, we don't have to go that many years back, just a couple of generations ago, if you will, most of the pastors didn't have formal theological education, but they did spend a lot of time in the book. As far as what's required is being called, because if you're called to it, then you're called to the book, which means the call to ministry is a call to preparation. If you're called to teach, you got to prepare to teach. If you're called to missions or whatever that is, you're called a pastor, you're called to be an evangelist, you have to prepare. You don't just get up and do anything. You have to prepare yourself to do that. And so historically, there was no theological education for a lot of the pastors, but they knew what thus said the Lord based on the time that they spent in the book. Now, when we start talking about what's required and what's recommended, my recommendation, however, today would be that you have somebody who has theological training, whether that's through graduate, undergraduate, or seminary with a doctorate or PhD. That depends on the size of the congregation and the makeup of the congregation. Some of that is still taking place today, where some just have a bachelor's degree and some Christian training, and they're able to still pastor churches. The Bible is silent as it comes to what is required in that as far as education. It's not silent when it comes to what qualifies you. Though, which is a little bit different take. And so the qualifications are in the book, but the requirement for the theological education is not in the book. And so we get that from the pastoral epistles that we see that out there. But I'll say this also, the way Jesus taught his disciples, which were primarily unlearned men, when he called the 12, they were not formally educated in that sense. The ones that we see, and the primary one that we see that was formally educated is Paul. Paul was a Pharisee of the Pharisees. Paul was educated at the feet of Gamaliel, which was one of the greatest scholars of his day. He was brilliant in that sense, and his teacher was as well. We don't see that. We see Moses educated as a prophet. He grew up in Egypt. He was educated by the Pharaoh, but not so for Peter and Andrew and James and John, and so they were mere fishermen. But one of the systems that Jesus used was he used the MAWL system. MAWL, model, assist, watch, and lead. Jesus would model what he wanted them to do. They would actually, it's an apprenticeship, if you will, in an oral society. He would model it. He would call them to assist him in doing it. He would actually step back and allow them to do it. He would watch them do it, and then when they were ready, he left the scene. And it took him 3 years to do that. And they weren't ready until they actually caught the vision of who he was and what their role was. On one occasion, I recall, Jesus says, "Who do men say that I am?" Wow. And somebody said, "Some people say that you're John the Baptist who's come back." And then he goes on to say, he said, "Well, who do you say that I am?" He says, "You're the Christ." Peter says, "You're the Christ, the Son of the living God." He says, "Now flesh and blood hadn't revealed that to you. That was by the Spirit." And it was soon after that Jesus set his eyes toward Calvary, because now he knew that they had the vision. It took them 3 years to get it, even though they was walking with him. It took them 3 years to get the vision that Jesus had, that they were the body that would take the gospel further than he would take it. He says, "Greater works will you do than I've done." Because Jesus only ministered in a certain geographical area. But for the gospel to get to the ends of the earth, and for him to get to the cross, that was something that one person couldn't do. And so the greater works were done after him, even, as in his own words.